Hey, everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking into those awkward moments,
Yeah.
the ones that make you just want to disappear. And we've got some really relatable stories, actually, from a comedic podcast we found that I think we're going to help us understand not only why these moments happen, but also what we can learn from them.
Awkward moments.
Yeah.
They can be mortifying in the moment, but they can also often provide some really interesting insights into how our minds actually work under pressure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about two stories in particular. The first one is about a guest on this podcast who shows up for a dream job interview wearing two different shoes.
Oh, wow.
I can't even imagine
Oh, my gosh.
the panic,
I know.
like right when you realize it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, from a psychological perspective, what's going on there? Like, why does stress cause these kinds of oversights to happen?
Well, it's actually really interesting. When
Okay.
we're under stress, that fight or flight response kicks in, and that can really impair our cognitive function.
Oh.
So our working memory, which is that part of our brain that holds information, temporarily becomes less efficient.
So it's not just like our brains go blank, but it's like the system for juggling information is just overloaded.
Exactly. And also our attention, our ability to focus on what's important, that also takes a hit.
Yeah.
So it's almost like our brain is saying, okay, got to focus on not messing up this interview.
Right.
And then all those other details, like matching shoes that
Yeah.
just kind of slip through the cracks.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when you're, really nervous about a presentation.
Yeah.
And you've practiced a million times, but then you get up there and you just completely forget what you're going to say.
Oh, absolutely. Have you ever experienced anything similar?
Oh, yeah.
Where stress made you overlook a detail?
For sure.
That seemed really obvious.
Oh, all the time. I think everyone has, I'm trying to think of a good example.
I have one.
Oh, you do?
Okay.
I once showed up to give a lecture with my shirt on inside out.
And I didn't even realize it until like halfway through.
Oh, that's a classic.
It happens.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's move on to our second story, which comes from a listener who wrote in, and this one involves a crush and a glass door.
Oh, no.
So this listener wrote in to say that they were in the cafeteria and they saw their crush and they went to wave at them, but they walked straight into a glass door.
Oh, my gosh.
Which, ouch, I can feel the secondhand embarrassment just hearing that.
I know. Public embarrassment can be so brutal because not only are you experiencing like the physical mishap, right?
Right.
But you're also just acutely aware that you're being observed.
Yeah.
And potentially judged.
Yes. Especially by someone you admire.
Exactly. So it just amplifies the awkwardness like tenfold.
Yeah. It's like all eyes are on you in that moment. And
Yeah.
especially when it's someone you're attracted to, it just feels like the stakes are so much higher.
Absolutely. And in those situations, our brains are just bombarded with like a cocktail of emotions and physiological responses.
Oh, yeah.
Your heart's racing, you might start sweating, your coordination can even go haywire. It's a lot to handle at once.
Yeah. You forget how to walk properly.
Exactly. And our desire to appear competent and attractive to a potential romantic interest that's deeply ingrained in us,
Yeah.
thanks to evolutionary psychology.
Right.
It's a primal instinct that influences our behavior even if we're not consciously aware of it.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got stress hijacking our brains, making us do things like wear mismatched shoes.
Right.
And then we have this added layer of attraction, making us bump into glass doors in front of our crushes.
Yeah.
It really paints a very humbling picture of human behavior.
It does. It really does. But you know what? The thing is, these seemingly embarrassing moments are actually incredibly normal.
Okay.
They're part of the shared human experience.
Really?
And believe it or not, they can actually be beneficial in the long run.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Now you've got me really curious.
Yeah.
How can something as cringe-worthy as, like, say, tripping on stage during a presentation actually be good for us?
Well, think of it this way. Each awkward encounter you have provides an opportunity to practice resilience.
Okay.
It's like a mini test of your ability to bounce back from embarrassment.
Right.
The more you experience these moments and survive them, the better you become at handling discomfort and uncertainty in general.
So it's like building up an emotional callus. The more we expose ourselves to these awkward situations, the less they'll sting over time.
Exactly. You develop a thicker skin and you learn not to take yourself too seriously.
I like that. A thicker skin.
Yeah. And plus, these moments can foster compassion,
Okay.
both for yourself and for others.
How so?
Well, when you realize that everyone experiences these awkward moments, it's easier to let go of that feeling of being singled out or judged. You start to see these situations as a common thread that connects us all.
Yeah.
Makes you more empathetic and understanding of other people's fumbles and faux pas.
That's a great point. Instead of feeling isolated in our awkwardness, it's actually something that unites us.
Exactly.
We've all been there.
We've all been there.
Okay, so we've talked about the science behind awkwardness and how these experiences can actually be beneficial in the long run. But what about in the moment?
Yeah.
What can we do when we find ourselves in one of those oh no situations?
First and foremost, I would say acknowledge the awkwardness.
Okay.
Trying to ignore it or pretend it didn't happen will only make it worse.
So lean into the cringe.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to own it. A little self-deprecating humor can work wonders in diffusing the tension.
Okay.
Remember our guest who tried to pass off their mismatched shoes as a fashion statement?
Oh yeah, they totally owned it, even if it was a bit of a stretch.
Exactly. Even if the joke falls flat, the act of acknowledging the situation and attempting to lighten the mood can really shift the energy.
Yeah.
It shows that you're not letting the awkwardness control you.
Right. And sometimes those awkward moments turn into hilarious stories later on.
Absolutely. They become anecdotes that you can share and bond over with others.
Right.
Laughter is a universal language, and those shared moments of humor can really strengthen connections, reminding us that we're all in this together.
Yeah, that's so true. All right, so let's bring it all together. We started with a guest showing up to a dream job interview in 2 different shoes because stress threw their working memory and attention out the window.
Right.
Then we had a listener's story about walking into a glass door right in front of their crush, highlighting how our deep-seated desire to impress a potential romantic partner can really amp up those awkward moments.
Exactly.
And through it all, we've learned that these cringeworthy experiences are not only super common, but they can actually help us become more resilient, more compassionate.
Right.
And let's be honest, they give us some pretty great stories to tell later on.
It's true. Awkward moments are like those embarrassing childhood photos we all have. We might cringe at them initially,
Yeah.
but they become part of our personal narrative, and they remind us that we've grown and learned along the way.
Love it.
Yeah.
So what we've discussed today is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the fascinating world of awkwardness.
Oh, yeah. There's so much more to explore. Like, for example, how does culture influence our perception of what's considered awkward? Are there certain situations that are universally awkward, or does it vary depending on social norms and expectations?
Those are great questions.
Yeah.
And I'm sure our listeners have their own awkward tales to tell.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
So we want to hear from you. What's your most memorable awkward moment? And how did it shape your perspective on handling those types of situations?
Think back to a time that still makes you cringe, maybe even laugh when you recall it. What did you learn from that experience? How did it impact your interactions with others or your own self-perception?
Remember, even in the most cringeworthy moments, there's often humor and a valuable lesson to be found.
So embrace the awkwardness, share your stories, and know that you're in good company. We're all in this wonderfully awkward human experience together.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder your own awkward adventures. Until next time, stay curious and remember to laugh at yourself every now and then.
It's good for the soul.
So we've got stress kind of hijacking our brains, making us wear mismatched shoes to job interviews.
Yeah.
And then we've got that whole attraction thing, making us run into glass doors right in front of the person we like.
It's amazing, right?
It really is. It paints a very humbling picture of what we're all capable of, I think, as humans.
It does. But here's the thing. These moments that feel so embarrassing,
Yeah.
they're actually incredibly normal.
Oh, okay.
It's part of what makes us human,
Yeah.
you know? Everyone goes through it. And believe it or not, these types of moments can actually be beneficial in the long run.
Okay, now I'm really curious.
Sure.
How can something that makes us cringe so much,
Yeah.
like tripping on stage during a presentation or something,
Right.
how can those actually be good for us?
Well, each time it happens, it's like an opportunity to practice resilience.
Okay.
You know, it's a test of your ability to recover from embarrassment.
Right.
And the more you experience these moments and come out on the other side, the better you get at just handling discomfort and uncertainty in general.
So it's like building up an emotional callus then.
Exactly. You develop a thicker skin. You learn not to take yourself too seriously.
Yeah.
And, you know, it can actually lead to more compassion
Okay.
for yourself and for others. Well,
Yeah.
when you realize that pretty much everyone has these moments,
Mm-hmm.
it's easier to let go of that feeling of like being judged or like you're the only one.
Right.
You start to see it as something that connects us all.
Right.
you know? And it makes you more empathetic. You understand where other people are coming from when they make mistakes.
That's a great point. Instead of being this isolating thing,
Yeah.
it's something that actually brings us together.
Exactly.
We've all been there.
Totally. Okay, so we talked about the science behind all of this.
Right.
And we talked about how it can actually be good for us in the long run.
Yeah.
But what about in the moment?
Yeah. What do we do when we're right there in that cringy situation?
First thing I would say is don't try to ignore it. Just acknowledge that it happened. You know, trying to pretend it didn't happen or just hoping everyone will forget it, that usually makes it worse.
So just lean right into the cringe.
Yeah, own it. Don't be afraid to laugh at yourself. A little self-deprecating humor can really help to, diffuse the tension.
I like that. And it reminds me of the guest who showed up with the 2 different shoes.
Yes.
They just totally owned it.
It did.
Even if it was a little bit of a stretch.
Even if the joke doesn't land perfectly.
Yeah.
The fact that you acknowledge it and try to make light of it, that can really shift the energy.
Right.
It shows you're not letting it control you.
Yeah. And a lot of times those awkward moments end up being the funniest stories to tell later on.
Oh, absolutely. They become these great anecdotes that you can connect with other people over.
Yeah.
You know, laughter is a universal language. And those shared moments of humor can really strengthen our bonds with each other.
Right. Reminding us that we're all in this together.
Exactly.
All right. So let's do a quick recap of what we talked about today.
Yeah, sounds good.
We started off with that story about the guest going to the job interview with 2 different shoes.
Hmm.
Because of how stress just totally throws off our working memory and our focus.
Right. Makes you forget the simplest things.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then we heard from our listener who walked right into a glass door in front of their crush, which really highlights how much that desire to impress someone you're attracted to can amp up those awkward moments.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that all of these experiences,
Yeah.
they're not only super common, but they can actually be beneficial in the long run.
Absolutely.
You know, they make us more resilient, they make us more compassionate,
Right.
and they give us some really good stories to tell.
Oh, yeah. It's like those embarrassing childhood photos. You
Yeah.
might cringe when you see them,
Uh-huh.
but they're part of your story.
Right. They make us who we are.
Exactly. And they remind you of how far you've come.
I love that.
Yeah.
And what we've talked about today is really just scratching the surface when it comes to this whole world of awkwardness.
Yeah. There's still so much to explore, like how different cultures view awkwardness.
Right.
Or if there are any situations that are universally awkward.
Right. Or are there things that are awkward here that wouldn't be awkward somewhere else?
Exactly. It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. And I bet our listeners have some amazing awkward stories of their own.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
So we want to hear from you. What's your most memorable awkward moment? And how did that experience shape you? How did it change the way you deal with those types of situations?
Yeah. Think back to a time when something happened that still makes you cringe or maybe even laugh now. What did you learn from that experience? How did it affect the way you see yourself or the way you interact with other people?
And just remember, even in those moments that make you want to disappear, there's usually some humor to be found.
Always.
And there's definitely something valuable to learn.
So embrace those awkward moments. Don't be afraid to share your stories. You're not alone. We're all in this together.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to think about your own awkward adventures. Until next time, stay curious and remember to laugh at yourself every now and then.
Absolutely. It's good for the soul.
It really is.
Okay.
Thanks for listening, everyone.